together, we have decided to engage in some Q&A amongst Tara, Heather, and myself about certain things that both apply to the film, but also to the current reality we are living in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. And towards the end, we will have some time for Q&A. As Heather mentioned earlier, if there are any moments where you need clarification or questions you may have, please feel free to use the chat box. And with that, I turn to Heather. And so the film covered a lot of ground, from lack of access to childcare, toxic stress, educator wages, all the things that we saw also reflected in the chat box. Can you share more about which of these issues has been most challenging in Maine in recent years, and also how that has either shifted or maybe been exacerbated with COVID-19?
Yeah, so I mean, that's an important question. And I think the film, hit the nail on the heads on all the aspects that we face. And we see that very much in Maine. Maine has pockets of where we're a childcare desert. There's just not enough childcare for the number of children who need slots. We have families who can't access subsidy, who could really use, the subsidy payments to help get their children into high quality programs. And again, I can speak very much from the educator perspective of what the low pay does to the field, and how it kind of squelches a lot of high quality educators from coming into the field. Personally, I've seen people leave the field a lot for public school jobs, higher pay, better benefits. I've seen people, move to fields that they don't love because they just need to support their families. And currently with this health crisis, we recently were talking to a director who, getting ready to open back up and has lost 2 employees trying to head into opening, knowing that a lot of programs as they're opening up still need to be fully staffed because of all the cleaning and extra duties that are going on right now. And I think that's something that people don't necessarily see when they're thinking about childcare and employees. Oh, if you don't have full enrollment, just keep your employees furloughed till you can get full enrollment. But with the number of guidelines we have now to open up safely for children, you need employees there who are just there cleaning. We went through a run through this morning of just how we were going to check children into our program because we open up Monday, and we already had to move some employees' start times up because we realized we couldn't field that many families in the morning and check everyone's temperatures and sign everyone in and make sure we were asking the right questions and taking those safety precautions with just 2 staff. We needed to add another staff to be able to do that, because all of a sudden we said, what if a child is not separating well? That takes 1 teacher away. So, I think what's really moving about this film is, yes, a lot of these problems were highlighted, but gosh, are we seeing it now 10 times full? And, and as scary as that is, it's a wonderful opportunity to take what we're going through right now and move this forward, because you can't ignore this problem right now.
Absolutely. And I will share, Heather, that is something that we are hearing being echoed across the country with early childhood educators and providers all across the United States that are sharing similar concerns, similar worries, where yes, just staffing and the concerns that providers have in terms of making sure that they create an environment that is safe for children and families, but also an environment that is safe for educators to be able to return back to work that they love and that they know is so important and necessary.
Yeah, and I'll add on top of that, just from personal experience, it's costing us money just to open up. We will lose money in the month of June to be open for families. So it's a huge challenge. But Tara, we'll turn to you, thinking about some of these problems we've been discussing. How is our state working to address some of these challenges, and how has COVID-19 impacted that work? So we know there was some state movement going on, and now, we're in the midst of this crisis. How is that working at the state level?
We have seen in the past couple of years a lot of focus on early childhood education in Maine, and just quickly some of the highlights around what our state has been doing. Maine was working on a preschool development grant that is specifically focused on developing systems for children and families from birth to 5. Maine also reinstated the Children's Cabinet this past year and created a new advisory council to the Children's Cabinet with representation from childcare programs. Our state had just put out months ago an economic development strategy for 10 years from 2020 to 2029. And it was one of the first times that we not only saw childcare and early education named, but really woven through the whole document with a real understanding that that childcare is essential and important to our economy. And then we've seen a lot of work in Maine on public pre-K expansion, and not just on growing it, but really on the importance of connecting birth to third grade and connecting the childcare sector with public schools in that pre-K expansion process. So that's all been happening, and then COVID-19 hits. And, you know, I'm happy to see from our state and community leaders that no one has said that these plans need to be thrown out the window or that they're not valid or important, but there's definitely attention being paid to. There are very urgent needs right now. And there's been a shift in really just seeing how to address emergency funding, how the CARES Act funds would be spent in Maine to really try to get some quick relief out to childcare programs. And not only from our, you know, state leaders and elected officials, but from folks like us at MaineAEYC, how to get important resources like information on applying for PPP loans and other things to the childcare community. So I think COVID-19 has, in some ways, put things a little bit, in many ways, put things on hold. But I hope that we're all looking at it with an eye to the plans that we already had in place, and that while we have to focus on urgent needs, we also will need to look at how we rebuild. So that's, you know, I think where there's some kind of silver lining or hope that can come from this. And so kind of speaking of those challenges and opportunities that we're thinking about here in Maine, I wanted to ask Lucy, when with your work at the National Association for the Education of Young Children, what challenges and opportunities are you seeing across the country right now in early care and education?
So, you know, as I shared when Heather offered her reflections to the original question, what many of you are experiencing in Maine is very similar to what we are hearing from providers and educators across the country. During the initial days of the pandemic, many childcare programs made the difficult decision of closing either voluntarily or to adhere to the stay-at-home orders in order to try and flatten the curve and minimize the spread of the coronavirus. However, there were a number of programs that stayed open for essential workers. And what we heard from those initial days when we conducted a survey to the fields, which we received over 11,500 responses from folks across the country, was that many child care providers were concerned about closing. When you talk about a system that has been disinvested in for decades, where you have businesses that were already operating on razor-thin margins, and many program directors and early childhood educators did not have a safety net of savings and support to be able to withstand this pandemic, people were very scared. They were scared that they would not be able to reopen, that they would not be able to stay closed for as long as may be necessary. And as time progressed, and as we continue to go back to the field with surveys and questions of how they were faring, the problems just continued to deepen. We saw many early childhood educators who ultimately either were furloughed or laid off. Just last month, 130,000 early childhood educators were either furloughed or laid off. And projections show that over the course of the upcoming weeks and perhaps months, we may see a decline that runs anywhere from a third to 2/3 of the early childhood workforce leaving the workforce because of unemployment or lack of employment. And so that is something that for us is deeply concerning. We know that families rely on childcare in order to be able to access their own work, to be able to do their own work. We know that this is something that families rely upon to continue their studies. We know that ultimately childcare is the backbone of this economy, and that the early childhood profession is the profession that powers and is behind all other professions. And so we started very early on to ring the alarm on this impending crisis. And what we have seen currently is that this sector, the childcare sector, is on the brink of collapse. While there have been some supports that have been provided from members of Congress through the CARES Act, and Tara, you alluded to that with the PPP, which is the Payment Protection Program. Many programs have not been able to access that. Many providers were scared to even access loans because they already have so much debt. And so what we are seeing, especially for those who are in family childcare, they were just almost single-handedly kept out of those services and supports. And so we continue to raise the alarm. We continue to lift up the stories of how important it is for families and communities to have access to childcare, and the fact that at this very moment, it is not something that families will be able to help because many are struggling with their own expenses and their own unemployment, but that we really need a federal investment from Congress to be able to bail out the childcare industry.
Yes.
Now, Lucy, to kind of follow up on this, in the current times, we're starting, to hear more and more Congress members talk about childcare. We're starting to see some things introduced in Congress. How do we act on these opportunities in this time of bipartisan support and innovation, to make change?
That's a great question, Heather. And, going back to the film, one of the things that I particularly love about No Small Matter is the fact that they frame this as an issue that does not have a political affiliation, right? This is everyone's issue. This is something that ultimately impacts all of us who reside in this country, because childcare does power everything around us, right? And so at this moment, there has been some effort from members of Congress, both on the Democratic and Republican side, who understand that childcare is really in crisis. And what we need at this very moment, if there is a singular ask that I would make of all of you, is we need to hear your stories. We need to hear how challenging this time has been, but also how challenging the time ahead will be. In order for members of Congress, and when I say members of Congress, right, I'm talking both about your congressional leadership in the House of Representatives, as well as those who are in the Senate. We need them to hear, I am a parent of 3, and I have that range from ages of 2 years old to 8 years old. I have a job that I love and I am looking forward to returning to, but if my child care program is not open, I will not be able to do that. Or I am a grandmother who has been, we relied on this child care program when my daughter was young, and now my grandchild is also going to this program because they've been a part of our community for 50, 70 plus years. However, I had a conversation with the program director, and they don't know if they will be able to withstand this. We want to hear also from the providers themselves, the fact that, to Heather's point about, you're losing money just to do this. And ultimately, we know that childcare, many are small businesses, many are women and minority-owned businesses. So it's important that members of Congress hear how this is going to be a loss. And I think that MaineAEYC in particular has done such a great job of collecting stories and serving as a space for those of you who may not feel comfortable. You can say, Lucy, I have never called a member of Congress. I don't know exactly what you're asking me to do. But that you can send it to Tara and to Heather and say, I don't know exactly what to do to get this to members of Congress, but I want to tell my story. And can you help me to be able to do that? And so I think that that is, at this moment right now, the most important advocacy ask that we can make. And again, we can shift the roles, whether you're a parent, whether you're a business leader. You can say, I have a staff of 15. More than half of them have children. If they do not have access to childcare, that is going to impact my business, right? So we need that diverse set of voices to be able to really make the case for why this is such an important thing that Congress needs to be paying attention to.
I love that thought, Lucy, because I think sometimes when we're talking about advocacy, and I know when I was first becoming an advocate, I said, but I can't remember facts and numbers and statistics and data. That's just not my strength. And very quickly I learned that, you know, when I'm talking to someone, a member of Congress, even a member of our local, you know, legislator, telling a personal story, their body language changes and their ears perk up. So I think that was a beautiful point to make, and that, you know, if you're just telling your story.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I alluded to this a bit earlier in terms of all of the things that MaineAEYC is already doing to lift up the stories. So Tara, can you just share a little bit about the opportunities that you, through MaineAEYC, but also through how other advocacy organizations across the state are really taking this moment to lift up stories and build momentum around the need to invest in high quality early childhood education?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things we did early on during this pandemic in, you know, later March was to send out a survey so we could collect both some data and some stories about what was happening. We really wanted to be able to share with our representatives and leaders around the state what the impact already was that early on in just a couple of weeks. And in addition to that, we partnered with some other nonprofits and advocacy organizations to do some joint letters to our state leaders and our congressional delegation around really understanding what the key things were going to be that childcare programs were going to need. And we were able to link those efforts by sharing some of the data from the survey around, you know, how dire the situation could get without public investment. The fact that without parents being able to pay and parents not utilizing childcare or childcare programs closing, that, you know, the backbone of the system has been parents paying. And so unless we looked at public funding, we weren't going to come out of this with our childcare sector intact. But I also wanted to just add to that, that one of the things that I also, we kind of spoke about this a little bit, but I love about this film, No Small Matter, is that while it focuses on early care and education, the voices you hear throughout the film come from so many different people and so many different perspectives. You know, you're hearing from a retired, someone who's retired from the military, or is a general, a business leader, a law enforcement, parents, grandparents. And that's one of the things we've focused on here in Maine in our advocacy efforts, is really how to work across sector and with a lot of different organizations. So one of the things we do is we're involved in helping to lead the Right from the Start Coalition. And so I think that's another, I'll share in the chat box in a little while some links to access some of the websites and resources. But I really love how our work in Maine has been through this coalition and through businesses and nonprofits and others coming together and talking about why this is so important. And I think, and a huge part of it is when we really focus on some of the pieces you were mentioning, Lucy, on that direct outreach to leaders and elected officials, which can sometimes be intimidating. But I thought, you know, it would be great to hear a little bit from Heather as someone who's been in early care and education for many years and has also become a really strong advocate and gotten very involved in advocacy. Some of the ways that you've advocated, and then we can also share about an opportunity we have for people to get involved right away.
Yeah, so we've been engaging in a lot of social media advocacy, knowing that's a good tool to get information out quickly, as well as, a lot more of our delegates to Congress are starting to pay attention to social media. So one thing we're going to do tomorrow, we have a picture opportunity. If you want to take a picture of yourself holding a sign, take a picture of your child, maybe you're a grandparent taking a picture of yourself, and with a sign that just says be a champion for childcare. On our MaineAEYC Facebook page, we will also have some text you can write around how to, ways that Congress can help us, some of the things we're experiencing in childcare right now, and we also will have how to tag your members of Congress on there. So those are helpful ways. It creates some talk. It might get out to people who may not have thought about childcare during these challenging times. Specifically if you don't have children in childcare, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, but you might be a business leader who is employing people who have children in childcare and they can't get back to work without it. It really does impact everyone in the economy. So if we can get things up on social media and shared, it's a wonderful way to spread the word and really do some grassroots advocacy. Next week, we'll also be planning a call-in day where we can all kind of call in and, chat with our Congress members' offices. Funny story is we did have some meetings with Shelley Pingree's office, Jared Golden's office, and Susan Collins' offices in the last few weeks, and all of them said, yeah, we've been getting a lot of calls lately from childcare supporters in Maine. So when we do it, and we do it in a group, it's really impactful. They all commented on that. Yeah, I've been hearing a lot from you, and what that does is it just resonates with them that they need to be, thinking about this, talking about this, and learning more about this. So it does make a difference. I know sometimes advocacy can feel frustrating because things don't always happen immediately, but we are starting to see some movement in Congress lately. So we do ask you to please advocate and please make those calls, and please do that work on social media, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. You can follow us on all three avenues.
After this webinar discussion is over, the slide that I just shared will be coming to you in an email. So I know that was a lot of text, no need to copy it down or anything like that. We'll get it to you.
And that will all be posted on our Facebook tomorrow as well. Also, if you don't subscribe to our e-news, that's another great way to get advocacy information, because some days we will send out an email blast on something, an action you can take. So that's another great way, is to go to our MaineAEYC website and subscribe to our e-news.
And I will share that because,
yeah.
Sorry, Heather, I just wanted to weigh in. Because of the connection that you all have, for those of you who are joining us on the call, with MaineAEYC, it completely and directly feeds into the larger national efforts. And so what we tend to do whenever an action alert comes out from the national office, it goes to folks like Tara and Heather, and then they are able to make that connection with each of you at the local and state level. And so it is deeply important to remain connected and engaged, because it's how we are able to amplify this, not just across your state, but again, across the entire country, to really lift up the need that we are seeing.
Yes, thank you for that, Lucy. And I think that's such an important connection as being part of an affiliate organization, is that the support at the national level as well from NAEYC and other supporting organizations it's what makes us able to do this work, because, as when we all join forces together, it's just so much more powerful. And so we do appreciate those connections and relationships. We have had a few questions sent in, and I'll throw this out, and Lucy and Tara, you can each choose to field it how you'd like. So one of the questions was, how can we support children and parents through this COVID-19 pandemic and stay connected?
Tara, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll start there. So one of the things that has come up a lot in discussions that we've had, I join in here in Maine. We have a lot of communities of practice run through Maine Roads to Quality Professional Development Network with some some of you may join in on those. And something that we've been talking about a lot on those forums is the importance of supporting the social and emotional needs and the mental health of folks around Maine, and in particular young children and families. And so there's going to be a lot of ways that we can be innovative in how we do that. It's definitely more difficult when we're trying to do a lot of support virtually and online. And so one thing that I think is really important that we think about when it comes to young children is that because there's so much less that we can do virtually and online, it becomes really important that we're thinking about how to support their parents and caregivers and their families, who will then in turn be able to provide extra support for them at home. So that's something we've been thinking about a lot in our own work as well. Heather, I don't know if you want to add to that since you're directly doing that work also.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we've kind of navigated the world of online and staying connected with our children and families. Everything we put out online has been optional, knowing that many of our families have older siblings navigating online learning. We've been doing a lot of Zoom meetings, just connecting face to face. We might sing a song, I might do an experiment, we might play a little virtual game, but it's just connection. It's not about, we're learning these letters, we're learning these numbers, we're looking at each other, we're talking about what we're doing at home, we're sharing about our family, we're showing our favorite toy on the screen, and keeping those social connections, I think, are so important, that we're still here. We didn't just take off on you. We still love you. We still care about you. So, those are the ways we have been touching base online, and as well as reaching out to the families and how are you doing? I think sometimes those simple questions help. So, in the pieces of moving forward to opening, today we videotaped, we had 2 educators pretend they were the children coming to school with their family, and we videotaped how you come to school now, how that's going to be different, so that we'll send that video home to families so they understand that coming into school is going to look a little different. The children can watch the video and understand that coming into school is going to look a little different. But we had a webinar, 3 weeks back with a social worker here in Maine, and she had really mentioned the importance of using social stories with children's too. So there's been a lot of available online. We have shared some on our website, and I think those are all important things. Anything we can help children understand and process in their own terms at their own developmental stages about what's going on in the world is very important. So, knowing that this is a big problem and it's hard to narrow down sometimes our focus. And I know, as an advocate, that's something that's troubled me in the past is, how do I hone in on maybe one thing, we could do? So what is the most important thing we could be doing right now, Lucy, to support the childcare sector?
I know that this can feel so large and it can feel so challenging, but I alluded to this earlier. At this very moment, what we know is that states are struggling with their budget because they have been trying as much as possible to address and respond to the pandemic. We know that families are struggling economically, especially as they themselves are dealing with unemployment and insecurity, economic insecurity. So at this moment, what childcare needs is really a federal investment. It needs our Congress members to step in and provide a bailout for this industry. We have seen members of Congress bail out other industries like the airline industry. And so knowing how important childcare is for members of the community, we really need members of Congress to hear that this is something that that you all care about. This is something that will impact you, that if programs are not able to open or if they are not able to exist, once there is a full opening of your state, that is going to be really impactful. And I think also that framing it in the reality of right now, Tara, you and Heather mentioned that Maine is a state where there are childcare deserts. Because of the current guidelines to be able to provide childcare in a way that is safe for children, there are going to be a decrease in slots. So that means that the availability of childcare across your state is going to be different. So members of Congress also need to hear that. Like, that is the single largest ask that I can make of any of you, from the world and the moment, from the space that you occupy in this world. How is childcare going to impact you? Again, thinking if you are a funder, if you are a business owner, if you are a parent, a caregiver, if you yourself are a childcare provider or an early childhood educator, how can you, like, what is the story that you can lend? And then how do you have that conversation with others in your community and in your networks to encourage them to share the same? Because there really is so much power in collective voices and in speaking together towards this goal of ensuring that we have investments, significant investments in childcare at this moment.
Thank you. So Tara, when we secure that investment, because we're going to do this, because we have amazing advocates and we're going to keep fighting so that we can, maybe help stabilize the industry, through this crisis. But, looking beyond that in the next 2 years, what do you think, with our limited resources would be our #1 priority for advancing ECE in Maine?
Well, one of the, I think, frames that's helpful to look at this is that right now we're in an urgent situation where we're responding to the largest needs and just making sure this industry is stable and it frankly is saved as it should be and needs to be. But as we look out, we're really going to be thinking about rebuilding, and it gives us an opportunity to look at a lot of the changes we already knew needed to happen before COVID-19, the things that No Small Matter really illustrated in that film. And one of those is the fact that childcare has always been essential. It really is a public good. It just hasn't been financed as one. And so I think, as we look forward here in Maine, both in our federal and state level advocacy, we're really going to be focused on, and an important priority is to think about how to rebuild the system in a way that really works for everyone, where early educators are making really fair wages that honor their experience and skills, and that the funding is stable and consistent, so that we don't end up in another situation like this. And it's unfortunate that it took something like COVID-19 to really shed light on in a way that's making everyone see it, but maybe that silver lining can help us and get us to a place that works better for children, families, and early childhood professionals. And as we close out tonight, I did want to point out that in the chat box, I will send all these links through an email. So if you don't need to necessarily go through and copy everything if they look good to you, but I did copy in a bunch of resources, including one of the questions that came to us ahead of time was looking for links to, and information about places in Maine that advocate on behalf of children. So we included the link to our website, as well as some partner organizations that we work with that do great work, and also national level advocacy with America for Early Ed and NAEYC. So thank you so much, Lucy, for being with us tonight. This has been really wonderful to talk about this film and talk about the situation that we're all in, both in its challenges and its opportunities. And a huge thank you to everyone who watched the film and joined in tonight.
No, thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you all for taking time to watch the film and to join us in today's conversation. Again, I encourage you to be part of the call to action that was issued today to share your story and to remain connected to this work. It is a difficult situation that we are in. It is a difficult moment ahead, but I remain anchored in the resiliency of this community and our ability to weather this storm together. So thank you so much for opening up this opportunity for us to have this very important conversation.
Yes. Good night, everyone.